I usually do interviews on this YouTube page, but I was emailed this morning by a former student who had a really good question. And as I started thinking about how I wanted to respond to it, I said, gosh, man, this is going to take 4 days of typing back in an email. So I thought what I would do is I would just respond via video and kind of talk it out. And if I needed to do another one, I could do that. But I think, it's a lot easier to discuss some of these things and actually write about them. Now, caveat, I'm not at my best today. You can see I'm much fatter here than normal. I was helping Dr. Clark with his bees last night, and about 30 of them got me in the chin and neck. So uh, I'm feeling a little peaked, as people might say. But I got this message from Julie Yates. Julie graduated at UVa-Wise back in around 2005, 2006, and she was one of our history majors. Really good history student, just a very good person overall. And she went off to Eastern Kentucky and got a master's in history, and she's teaching high school history now. And she kind of emailed me these questions, which I think she actually knows the answer to, but I think she kind of wanted to see where academics are on it, to see if we're looking at things the same way. And it's as you would expect, it's a question regarding the recent turn in historical memory, i.e. Confederate monuments. She'll go back to school and she will certainly have students who are interested in this. So she asked a variety of things. She says, talking about Confederate monuments, when they came about, put them in context. Where does it end? That's a darn good question that we haven't said very much about. Frustration, and I'm frustrated too with the defacing of monuments to people like Lincoln. I mean, come on. That's a hard one to convince me of right there. But let's start off. One of the things people struggle with when they come to these Confederate monuments is they say, those who support those monuments and defend those monuments, they say, well, you're destroying history. That's not history. It's a monument built by a group of people who have a peculiar or a particular historical interpretation of events. Now, by and large, these monuments were built by people who were supporters and defenders of the Confederacy. And, a lot of people may want to put a nice shiny glow on it, but the Confederacy was, by its very definition, an effort to essentially overthrow the government of the United States, destroy the United States, carve it into two separate nations, etc., etc. And if, somebody decides they're going to build an army and try to tear the U.S. asunder in 2020, I would call them a traitor, actually. And in 1861, a lot of people were traitors. People hate to hear that. And I understand, people were kind of hooked on what they're hooked on. But here you have, not in 1866 or 1867, monuments being built to the Confederacy. What you have is monuments being built to the Confederacy between 1905 and 1925. Well, a lot has happened in the intervening 40 years. From the 1870s into the 1880s, you have the development of what we call lost cause idea. Lost cause being the glorification of the Confederate effort and the justification of the Confederate effort and the explaining away the fact that the Confederate effort failed for one or two very important reasons, neither of which actually signals any sort of shortcoming or weakness by the Confederacy. Then around 1890 to about 19 I think about 1902, virtually every southern state rewrites its state constitution to basically bring it in line with what the state constitution read in 1861. One of the things Reconstruction required was each state had to rewrite its constitution to include certain things like no more slavery, some sort of statement of the state of blacks in the political structure of that state. 1890 to 1902, all southern states basically reversed course and turned back the clock 40 years. And what you have is a lost cause generation pushing the official sanction of a 1861, pre-1861 political outlook, and then the growth of this outlook that will end up manifesting itself in a variety of ways, to include the birth of the Second Klan and the birth of the NAACP and all these other things. Let me explain this. If anybody has taken a history class with me, I always talk about the pendulum. History generally operates on pendulum, and we can be technical about it, and we can talk about Hegel's dialectic, or you can just do the Brian thing and understand that one activity is going to pull the pendulum to one side. And while the pendulum is swinging, we don't know where it ends, but eventually, opposing activity, let's call the pendulum police brutality. Opposing activity, protest against police brutality, will pull the pendulum back. Now, the people who say, I think police ought to have the right to brutalize anybody they want at any point, are over here. And the people who say, I don't think police should be able to brutalize anybody at any time for any reason, are over here. There are people, like most of us, who are somewhere in here. When we say, well, I can understand, if a policeman is being attacked by somebody and, he may have to defend himself or something like that. Okay. Keep in mind that the pendulum swings fastest right here. We are the ones who see the pendulum go zooming past in one way or the other. It only holds still here and here. That's what makes these feel like such important moments, because it holds still there. And the rest of us are just watching this do this the whole time, and we're here watching it pass us by. That's the pendulum. The pendulum is a really nice explanation for cause and effect in history, or at least I found it to be pretty doggone effective. And that's what we're seeing here. We have, for years, as historians, said, let's interpret things. Monument Avenue in Richmond. Monument Avenue in Richmond is a wonderful example of what I'm fixing to tell you. You have Stonewall Jackson. You have Robert E. Lee. And rather than wanting historians to go in there and interpret these folks and say, this guy was a general in the Confederacy, this monument was placed here in the 1890s or the 19-teens, and the reason why it was placed here is because they wanted to sell better houses in this neighborhood. They wanted to bring a certain tone to the neighborhood. This was going on in the world, and how do people feel about it now? They didn't want that. And this is generally how it works. Politicians want you to be here or here. If you're here, you're nothing but trouble. You need to be here or here, because that's where they all are. And if you are here or here, you're going to be with them or completely against them, which makes all the decision making really easy for them. Well, historians are generally somewhere here. And as people who reside in the, what I would like to call the logical center for the most part, we want to explain it. We would like the opportunity to interpret it. But the politicians don't necessarily want that to happen. And that's the reason why when you have these crises over the course of the last 10 or 15 years of Monument Avenue, very seldom do they actually get academics involved. They get other political people, or they get community activists, or they get the local lawyer or business group together. They don't necessarily get historians involved, because we're going to give everybody an answer that they don't quite like. That's generally the way we do it. Now, the folks over here are losing their monuments. And they're whining and complaining because people like me here haven't done anything for them. They don't want any of that. Now, people over here are spray painting their monuments, which, by the way, I think actually looks pretty good. When I see the Robert E. Lee spray painted, I kind of like to think of the Berlin Wall and public art, which is a really legitimate thing. It actually does look good. And I think maybe you could interpret that and tell the story from Robert E. Lee Civil War all the way up to Robert E. Lee, victim of Black Lives Matter protest in 2020. But that's one of the big keys. One of the big keys is that people who are excited on one side or the other have driven the debate. And the debate has gone pretty much where we can expect it to go. Not very much in the way of intelligent analysis, except now, after the fact, there's plenty of intelligent analysis. But along the way, people were more concerned about getting their truth out than actually hearing a truth. And that's part of the real issue here. Let me go back down through this question. I want to make sure I've hit it all. A lot of the monuments were erected during this era, from the end of the rewriting of the state constitutions in 1902 through the Second Klan, which was the, as I call the Walmart of all clans. They hated everybody. But they are erected during that 20-year period or so, when you really do have some pretty serious racial tension in the U.S. The Second Klan, vicious Klan, hated basically everybody except white male Protestants, pretty much. I'd like to point out that the Second Klan actually considered itself a progressive organization, because in the midst of all of its hatred and violence, it did support keeping laborers at work during World War I. So the Klan considered itself on that one point to be a very progressive organization. I've never actually heard anybody else say that, but that's true. Monuments can be valuable educationally. Be careful about letting them teach, though. I mean, monuments are put up by one very small segment of society that was lucky enough to either have the money to put it up or be able to raise the money to put it up. When a monument says anything, be incredibly skeptical, because, I mean, it's sort of like, asking John the Baptist to discuss Christianity. You pretty much know the story you're going to get. Same as asking, John F. Kennedy to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I can already tell you how that's going to turn out, how the story's going to go. But one of the real questions, and this is, I think, a really, really important one, where does it end? Well, see, that's the problem. We got the pendulums. How far does the pendulum swing? Does it swing here, or does it swing way over here? And that's a concern. I look at these Confederate monuments, and I get pretty frustrated with how people gravitate to Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee, he was a great general. For the last year and a half of the war, he knew he was going to lose, and he still sent people into the meat grinder. There's a moral question there. At the same time, Thomas Jefferson, founder of UVA, and by extension, in a way, UVa-Wise, Thomas Jefferson's not completely clean. I would say this. I would say that when we talk about figures in the past, and this is just my estimation here. Prior to 1900, I would guess that 99.9% of whites in the United States were racist. I think it's easy to say that, and I think I'm probably pretty doggone close with that number. Really, prior to the 1960s, you're probably talking about 85% of whites in America being racist. And that has been a very recent dramatic change. We're like reformed smokers. We can smoke for 20 years and be great with smoking until the day we quit, and then nobody should ever smoke. And I never smoked a cigarette and all that neat stuff. But where does it end? Do we take down statues of Jefferson? My position is no. Thomas Jefferson founded a nation. He was enlightened to a great degree, but the areas in which he did not illustrate any real enlightenment, or let's say the ability to act on his enlightenment, were areas where he would probably argue that he did not have much of a choice. There's some evidence out there, Thomas Jefferson essentially saying, and I can't remember, it's been years since I read it, but what he's basically saying is, we should emancipate all the slaves in Virginia, but if you do that, then all of a sudden, you're going to have a lot of people losing incredible amounts of money. And they're all the people who are important to the Virginia political system. So you can't really quite, expect that's going to happen. Opportunism, pragmatism being what it is. Thomas Jefferson, he was a slave owner. Why didn't he free his slaves? Because he did not voluntarily want to plunge himself into any more poverty than he already was in. And those are fairly weak explanations or defenses. But I'll put it this way. I hate Facebook, but I buy the stock because it's guaranteed money. And you all probably do some of those other things that trouble you morally, just because it's good for you in some particular way. That would be my answer. It's a tough one. Do we throw Washington in the river? Do we throw Jefferson in the river? No, because if we throw them in the river, we got to throw everybody in the river. If Thomas Jefferson and George Washington don't warrant statues, nobody in American history warrants a statue. At the same time, let's not get confused and put Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson on the same level as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. They were nowhere near there. I hope I answered the question. I hope I answered it adequately. I fully admit that I may not have, but that's kind of the risk you run when you don't know everything. But I'll sign off, and hopefully Julie gets something out of this, and hopefully if she doesn't, if I've left anything unsaid, she gets back with me. Okay, see you later.